Have you ever felt like the world of cutting-edge medical research just moves too fast? Like you need a translator sometime.
Yeah, trying to keep up with breakthroughs that could, redefine how we fight complex diseases. It's a lot.
Well, today we're offering a bit of a shortcut. We're diving deep into one study that's really shifting the landscape for a particularly tough type of cancer.
We're zeroing in on advanced non-small cell lung cancer, NSCLC, and specifically patients who are also battling brain metastases.
Right. And this isn't just, another paper. It feels like a really pivotal moment for people who've historically faced pretty grim odds.
Exactly.
So our mission today in this deep dive is to really unpack the findings from a crucial subgroup analysis. It's from the Empower Lung 1 study published in Cancer.
And we're going to look closely at how one treatment, Cemiplimab, is changing the outlook, redefining hope, you could say.
To really get why this is so important, maybe let's set the scene a bit. What are we up against with NSCLC and brain mets?
Well, NSCLC itself is unfortunately common, and it can be very aggressive. And the tough part is brain metastases, or BM, they're quite prevalent.
How prevalent are we talking?
We see them in about 10% of all NSCLC patients when they're first diagnosed.
Huh.
And that jumps up to around 26% for those with stage IV disease. So quite a significant number.
And historically, those numbers meant a really difficult prognosis, didn't they?
Oh, absolutely. For patients who didn't have specific driver mutations,
Yeah.
the median overall survival, it was incredibly short, sometimes just, 3.7 to 4.8 months.
Wow. Regardless of when the brain met showed up.
Yeah, whether they were there at the start or developed later. Even with the standard treatments back then, like radiotherapy plus chemo, survival was usually only around 6 to maybe 9.9 months. It was, well, a very challenging situation.
So this is where the story starts to change, right, with immunotherapy?
Exactly. Specifically, PD-1 pathway inhibitors. These are treatments that instead of directly attacking the cancer, they kind of wake up the body's own immune system to do the fighting.
Unleash the immune system, basically.
That's a good way to put it. And what's really interesting is their potential to fight cancer even inside the brain, despite that tough blood-brain barrier.
Which has always been a major hurdle.
A huge hurdle. But these therapies seem to help immune cells get across and target those brain lesions.
Okay, so that brings us to this specific study, Empower Lung 1. What makes it stand out?
Well, historically, clinical trials for these new immunotherapies, they often excluded patients with brain metastases, or maybe included just a very small number.
Right, which isn't very helpful for doctors treating those patients in the real world.
Precisely. But Empower Lung 1 was different. It was actually quite groundbreaking because it did include patients who had symptomatic brain metastases, provided they'd been treated before, usually with radiotherapy.
Okay, so symptomatic and previously treated. That's an important detail.
It is. And it's what makes these findings so relevant, so powerful for actual clinical practice. These are the patients who desperately need better options.
Okay, with that context set, let's dig into the study itself. How is Empower Lung 1 set up?
Right. So the trial, its number is NCT03088540, if you want to look it up, took patients with advanced NSCLC. A key thing was they needed high levels of PD-L1 expression.
High PD-L1, what level are we talking?
At least 50% of their tumor cells had to show this marker. Then these patients were randomized, 1-to-1.
Okay, to what?
Either they got Cemiplimab, just on its own monotherapy, or they got the standard platinum doublet chemotherapy.
And the subgroup we're focusing on today, the ones with brain metastases.
Yes, that's the critical part for our deep dive. Out of the 565 eligible patients in the main study, 69 of them, that's about 12%, had these previously treated symptomatic brain metastases right when they entered the trial.
And you mentioned something about how they tracked the brain metastases response being more real world.
That's right. The study protocol didn't require follow-up scans specifically to confirm if the brain metastases were responding or not, which, is often how things work in a busy clinic. It reflects reality a bit more closely.
And this wasn't just a quick look, was it? They followed these patients for a long time.
They really did. For this brain metastases group, the median follow-up was an impressive 55.7 months.
Wow, that's over 4.5 years.
Yeah, so we're looking at really solid long-term data, very robust.
And one more crucial detail, patients on chemo could switch treatments.
Correct. If their disease progressed while on chemotherapy, they were allowed to cross over and receive Cemiplimab. That's important to keep in mind when we look at the final survival outcomes, as it can sometimes dilute the difference a bit.
Okay, got it. So let's get to the results, the big numbers. Starting with overall survival, OS. What did it show for patients with brain metastases?
This is really the headline. For those patients with brain mets, Cemiplimab delivered a median overall survival of 52.4 months.
52.4 months. How does that compare to chemo?
It's a huge difference. Chemo came in at just 20.7 months.
So more than double, more than 2.5 times the survival. That's incredible for this group.
It really is a massive improvement. Now, just for context, let's look at the patients without brain metastases. In that group, Cemiplimab showed a median OS of 24.3 months versus 12.5 months with chemo. Still a benefit, obviously.
Right, still doubling survival there too, roughly.
Exactly. But here's the really fascinating insight. While Cemiplimab helped both groups, the survival advantage, that relative benefit, was actually even more pronounced for those with brain metastases.
Huh. So it worked better, relatively speaking, in the tougher cases.
It seems that way. It suggests that maybe immunotherapy, this activation of the immune system, might be particularly good at tackling these brain lesions, maybe overcoming some of those barriers that traditional chemo struggles with.
And another way to look at it, how did survival compare between Cemiplimab patients with and without brain mets?
That's also striking. Patients on Cemiplimab had pretty similar outcomes whether they had brain metastases or not. But with chemotherapy, having brain metastases clearly meant a worse prognosis.
So Cemiplimab kind of leveled the playing field in that sense.
You can say that, yes. And if you look out further, say at 48 months, 4 years, the chance of survival for someone with brain metastases on Cemiplimab was estimated at 57.1%,
Over half were still alive at 4 years.
compared to only 17.9% for those who started on chemo. That's a 58% reduction in the relative risk of death. It's dramatic.
Absolutely dramatic. Now, survival is key, but what about keeping the cancer from growing? Progression-free survival, PFS.
Also significantly better with Cemiplimab. For patients with brain metastases, median PFS was 12.5 months with Cemiplimab.
Okay, and chemo.
Just 5.3 months. So again, more than double the time without progression.
And did they look specifically at progression within the brain?
They did. And that was also impressive. Brain metastasis-specific PFS was 20.6 months with Cemiplimab compared to 9.1 months with chemo.
So nearly 2 years without brain progression versus less than 1.
Right. It strongly suggests Cemiplimab isn't just extending life overall, but it's actively controlling the disease within the brain for much longer.
Okay, so living longer without the cancer worsening. But what about actually shrinking the tumors, the response rates?
Yeah, let's look at the objective response rate, or ORR. That's the percentage whose tumors shrank significantly. For patients with brain metastases, the ORR with Cemiplimab was 55.9%.
Wow, over half responded. And for chemo?
Only 11.4%.
Goodness, that's what, almost 5 times higher with Cemiplimab? That's a huge difference.
It really is a massive difference in how many patients actually saw their tumors shrink.
And for those who did respond, how long did that response last? The duration of response, TR?
Also, much better with Cemiplimab.
Yeah.
The median DR for responders was 50.3 months.
50 months. That's over 4 years.
Exactly, compared to just 12.5 months median DR with chemotherapy.
So not only are way more people responding, but when they do respond, it's lasting incredibly longer, almost 4 times longer on average.
Precisely. It points to really durable control for those who benefit.
Now, beyond the scans and the survival curves, how did the patients actually feel? Did the study look at quality of life?
It did, using patient-reported outcomes, or PROs. And this is often just as important, right? Living longer is one thing, living better
Is the goal? Yeah.
And what's really compelling here is that Cemiplimab led to statistically significant improvements in overall global health status and quality of life.
Okay. Can you quantify that?
Yeah, they used a standard scale, the EORTC QLQC30 GHS score. Patients on Cemiplimab saw an average improvement of 9.35 points compared to chemotherapy.
9.35 points. How significant is that?
Well, a change of 10 points is usually considered clinically meaningful. So
Yes.
9.35 is really close to that threshold, and importantly, the difference was statistically significant.
So likely a noticeable positive difference in their daily lives.
Very likely. It
Yeah.
suggests a tangible benefit. Think about what that could mean. Maybe less fatigue, more energy, being able to do more things you enjoy.
Right. Were there other quality of life aspects that improved?
Yes, the analysis for the brain metastases group also showed significant improvements with Cemiplimab in things like role functioning, being able to work or do usual activities, and emotional functioning.
That's huge.
And also reductions in some really troublesome symptoms like fatigue and appetite loss compared to chemo.
And importantly, did any of these quality of life measures actually favor chemotherapy?
No. Not a single one. All the significant differences favored Cemiplimab. It really paints a picture of not just living longer, but living better too.
Okay, so we have better survival, longer control of the disease, higher response rates, more durable responses, and better quality of life. What about the other side of the coin, safety and side effects?
Also a favorable story for Cemiplimab. They looked at severe side effects, what are called grade 3 or higher treatment emergent adverse events, or TEAs.
Okay, what were the rates?
In the brain metastases group, the rate of these severe TEAs was 35.3% for Cemiplimab. For chemotherapy, it was significantly higher at 60.0%.
So nearly double the rate of severe side effects with chemo.
Pretty much. And the types of side effects were generally what you might expect. Chemotherapy had higher rates of things like anemia, low white blood cell counts, pneumonia.
But typical chemo-related issues.
Right. Whereas Cemiplimab's side effects were more in line with what we see with immunotherapies, things related to immune system activation, which are usually manageable.
Was there any difference in the most serious outcome, like treatment-related deaths?
Yes, and this is a critical safety finding. In the patients with brain metastases receiving Cemiplimab, there were 0 Ts that led to death.
0.
0. But in the chemotherapy arm, unfortunately, 3 patients, that's 8.6% of that group, did experience Ts that resulted in death.
That's a stark difference.
It really is. And overall, the safety profile seen in this brain met subgroup was consistent with what was seen in the broader Empower Lung 1 study population, both with and without brain mets. No major new safety signals popped up.
Okay, so let's try to pull this all together. When you step back and look at this deep dive, what's the big takeaway for us for understanding lung cancer treatment now?
Well, it feels truly transformative, especially for this specific group. Cemiplimab monotherapy is offering significantly longer survival,
Much longer.
delayed disease progression, including crucial control within the brain itself,
Higher response rates, much more durable responses.
and importantly, improved quality of life with a better safety profile compared to standard chemotherapy.
And this is specifically for advanced NSCLC patients with high PD-L1 expression who have these treated brain metastases.
Exactly. And the study's design, remember, including these patients without that strict radiological follow-up for the brain mets, makes it feel very relevant to everyday practice.
Yeah, it gives doctors really solid evidence for a patient group that's often been, well, kind of left behind in research.
Underserved, absolutely. This provides vital data.
So, thinking ahead, these results are remarkable for patients with treated brain metastases. Does this make you wonder about the potential in other scenarios?
It definitely does. It raises big questions. What potential could Cemiplimab or maybe other immunotherapies have for patients whose brain metastases haven't been treated yet?
Or maybe in combination therapies?
Right, combining it with radiation or other targeted drugs. There's a lot of research looking into those areas now. What further advances might we see for these really complex cancer cases in the next few years?
It feels like we're just scratching the surface of what immunotherapy can do in these challenging settings.
The field is moving incredibly fast. It's definitely something for everyone to keep an eye on. These kinds of targeted, life-extending therapies, they really offer a profound sense of hope, changing the outlook for diagnoses that were once considered almost hopeless.